Rain fell upon Ashbourne Estate as though the heavens themselves had taken offense at its grandeur. Once, its windows had blazed with candlelight, and its terraces had echoed with music and confident laughter. Now the great house stood hushed beneath a sullen sky, its chimneys breathing faint ribbons of smoke into the damp evening air. Within those stone walls a duke lay dying, though not, as cruel rumor insisted, from illness alone. Alistair Ashbourne, widowed these 3 years, had been a figure of formidable composure in Parliament and ballroom alike. His voice once commanded attention without effort. His posture alone suggested inheritance carved in marble. Yet fever had reduced him to stillness. Propped against embroidered pillows, his once steady hands trembled upon the coverlet, and the sharp planes of his face seemed etched deeper by each passing night. Pride lingered in his eyes, but strength had withdrawn from his limbs like a loyal regiment dismissed too soon. The physician came and went with rehearsed gravity, prescribing draughts that dulled pain but did little else. What disturbed the servants more than the Duke's pallor was the absence of his kin at his bedside. They gathered faithfully in the lower drawing-room, voices low but purposeful, their morning attire already selected with suspicious readiness. Edmund Ashbourne, the Duke's younger brother, presided over these conferences with an air of reluctant duty. He spoke of stewardship, of inevitable transitions, of securing the estate's future against uncertainty. His tone was sympathetic. His eyes were calculating. "It is best," Edmund murmured one evening as rain tapped the tall windows, "that we prepare ourselves. My brother would not wish the estate to suffer disarray." A sister-in-law adjusted her pearls and sighed as though burdened by compassion. "Of course, one must think of continuity." Upstairs, the Duke's supper cooled untouched. Among the servants, whispers traveled faster than footmen on the stair. Some pitied their master. Others feared dismissal should the title pass into colder hands. Yet none ventured unbidden into his chamber after dusk. None but one. Eliza Hartwell had arrived at Ashbourne scarcely a fortnight prior, her references modest but sincere. The daughter of a country schoolmaster undone by unfortunate speculation, she bore misfortune with an upright bearing that belied her station. There was intelligence in her gray eyes, and a quiet steadiness in her manner that resisted humiliation. She had learned early that dignity, once surrendered, rarely returned. On that particular evening, she paused outside the drawing-room as a tray trembled lightly in her grasp. Through the door left ajar, she heard Edmund's voice again, smooth as polished wood. "The physician confides that recovery is unlikely. We must consider the legal formalities before circumstances compel haste." A soft murmur of assent followed. No one spoke the Duke's name. Eliza stood very still. It was not her place to judge, nor to interfere. Yet she had observed the neglected fire in his chamber, the medicine administered without care, the untouched plates returned with indifferent shrugs. Illness humbled even the proudest of men. Abandonment destroyed them. She carried the tray upward instead of toward the servants' hall. The corridor to the Duke's room lay dim, lit only by a single lamp whose flame quivered in the draught. She knocked once, softly, and hearing no reply, entered. The chamber smelled faintly of extinguished candles and bitter tonic. Heavy draperies obscured the moonlight, and the hearth smoldered weakly as though uncertain of its purpose. He lay turned slightly toward the window, eyes closed, breath uneven. Setting the tray aside, Eliza crossed the room with deliberate calm. She stirred the embers until flame answered her persistence, casting warmth across the carpet. Only then did she approach the bed. "Your Grace," she said gently, though her voice did not waver, "you have not taken nourishment today." His eyelids lifted at once, revealing a gaze still sharp despite exhaustion. For a moment, confusion flickered there, then recognition hardened it. "Have they sent a nurse at last?" he asked, his voice roughened by fever but threaded unmistakably with pride. "No, Your Grace," she replied. "Only a maid." A faint, humorless breath escaped him. "Then I am indeed diminished." She met his gaze without flinching. "Illness diminishes no man's worth, sir. It merely tests the loyalty of those who claim it." Silence fell between them, heavy yet alive. The words had slipped from her before caution could restrain them. She lowered her eyes, expecting rebuke. Instead, he studied her as though assessing an unexpected adversary. "You speak boldly for one newly arrived." "Forgive me, Your Grace," she answered. "Boldness is sometimes required where neglect persists." His fingers tightened weakly against the coverlet. Below, faint laughter drifted upward from the drawing-room. "Neglect," he repeated as if tasting the word. She poured broth into a porcelain cup and held it toward him. He regarded it as though it were both insult and salvation. After a measured pause, he accepted her assistance, though his jaw clenched at the necessity. Each swallow seemed an act of reluctant surrender. Yet with every moment she remained steady, neither pitying nor presumptuous. When he faltered, she did not fuss. When he winced, she did not gasp. Her composure was not indifference but respect. "You risk reprimand," he said at length. "I risk regret more," she answered quietly. The fire crackled stronger now, light softening the austere lines of the chamber. Outside, rain continued its patient descent, but within those walls something imperceptible shifted. Not recovery, not yet, but resistance. He sank back against the pillows, breath easing marginally. "Miss Hartwell, your grace." "Hartwell," he repeated, committing it to memory. "Tell me, does the household below prepare for my funeral or merely my succession?" The question was delivered lightly, yet beneath it lay steel. Eliza hesitated only a fraction of a second. "They prepare for change, sir." A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. "And you? For whom do you prepare?" She adjusted the blanket with careful hands. "For the man who still breathes." The words lingered in the dim air like a vow neither had intended to speak. His gaze sharpened, no longer dulled by fever alone but stirred by something fiercer, a recognition that loyalty had not entirely deserted him. Below, a door closed firmly and Edmund's footsteps sounded upon the stair. Alistair Ashbourne turned his eyes toward the chamber entrance, then back to the maid who had dared defy silence. "Very well, Miss Hartwell," he murmured, voice gathering fragile strength. "Let us see whether courage proves more faithful than blood." And as the handle of his door began slowly to turn, Eliza realized the battle she had entered would not be waged against illness alone. Edmund Ashbourne entered without waiting to be announced, bringing with him the faint scent of cigars and damp wool. His gaze traveled first to his brother, then to the small table where broth steamed in delicate porcelain, and finally to Eliza, who stood composed beside the hearth. Surprise flickered across his expression, but it was swiftly replaced by something colder. "I had not been informed that additional staff were required at this hour," Edmund said smoothly. "The requirement arose when others neglected it," the Duke replied before Eliza could speak. Though his voice was still strained, it carried an edge newly honed. Edmund's smile tightened. "You should conserve your strength, Alistair. We would not wish agitation to worsen your condition." "My condition," the Duke returned, "appears to improve in direct proportion to attentive company." The implication settled heavily in the chamber. Eliza felt its weight yet did not lower her gaze. Edmund inclined his head with brittle courtesy and withdrew, but not before casting her a look that promised consequence. By morning, consequence had ripened into rumor. Servants paused in corridors when Eliza passed. Conversation resumed only after she had gone. The housekeeper summoned her with restrained displeasure and inquired, with pointed delicacy, whether she understood the boundaries of her station. Eliza listened without defense. When asked why she had remained in the Duke's chamber past midnight, she answered simply, "Because he required it." The answer traveled swiftly. Yet the Duke required more than broth. The physician, pressed for clarity, admitted that previous doses had been administered irregularly. A ledger revealed missed notations. A vial held less liquid than its measure allowed. Whether through incompetence or design, negligence had crept dangerously close to fatality. Eliza did not voice accusation. She adjusted the schedule herself. Under her quiet vigilance, the chamber altered. Curtains were drawn back to admit thin winter light. Fresh linens replaced stale ones. The hearth burned steadily. The Duke, though still weakened, began to sit upright for brief intervals. Pride returned first, then appetite, then a restless awareness of betrayal. "You wage war with teacups and tinctures," he observed one afternoon as she arranged his correspondence. "I wage nothing, your grace," she replied. "I merely refuse surrender." A faint spark lit his eyes. "Then you are braver than my blood." The remark would have scandalized the lower drawing-room, where Edmund convened daily with his wife and a solicitor newly arrived from London. Their consultations grew sharper as reports of the Duke's improvement circulated. Recovery disrupted expectation. Expectation, once disturbed, curdled into resentment. At luncheon, Edmund addressed the household with performative concern. "My brother must not be subjected to excessive stimulation," he declared, "particularly from those unaccustomed to aristocratic discretion." The words were aimed without naming her. Eliza continued pouring tea. Later that evening, as frost traced delicate veins upon the windows, the Duke requested a book from the library. Eliza returned with a modest volume of verse, its spine worn but dignified. She hesitated before placing it upon his bedside table. "My late wife favored that collection," he said quietly, observing her pause. "I selected it for its merit, not its history," she answered. He regarded her for a long moment, then extended the book toward her instead. "Read to me." She complied, her voice low and steady, each syllable threading warmth through the chamber. The poetry spoke of endurance and seasons turned by unseen hands. When she finished, silence lingered, not oppressive but contemplative. "You comprehend more than your position implies," he said at last. "My position implies only what others presume," she replied. The distinction was not lost on him. The following morning, he summoned the household to his chamber under the pretense of expressing gratitude for their concern. Edmund arrived promptly, confidence restored by assumption of authority. Servants gathered along the walls, uncertain. The Duke sat upright, pale yet composed, a blanket drawn across his knees like a mantle reclaimed. Eliza stood discreetly behind him. "I am informed," he began, "that my recovery was considered improbable." A ripple of discomfort passed through the room. "I regret to disappoint such certainty," he continued, eyes settling upon his brother. "It appears attentive care has proven unexpectedly persuasive." Edmund cleared his throat. "We have all desired your restoration, Alistair." "Indeed." The Duke's tone remained mild. "Then you will join me in commending Miss Hartwell, whose diligence ensured the medicines I required were administered precisely as prescribed." All gazes shifted to her. Color rose faintly to her cheeks, yet she did not bow. Edmund's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Surely any competent servant would have performed the same. "Perhaps," the Duke replied. Yet only one did. The acknowledgment, delivered publicly, altered the atmosphere irrevocably. Gratitude from a duke was no small currency. Bestowed upon a maid, it bordered on provocation. That afternoon, a parcel arrived from London addressed in the duke's unmistakable hand. Eliza received it reluctantly. Within lay a slender leather-bound journal, its pages blank, accompanied by a brief note, "For thoughts unsuited to silence." She held the gift as though it might burn her. It was not extravagance that unsettled her, but intention. To offer such an item implied recognition of intellect, not merely service. Word of the parcel reached Edmund before supper. By twilight, tension crackled sharper than the frost outside. Edmund confronted his brother privately, voices rising behind closed doors. Though Eliza could not discern every phrase, she heard her name distinctly, followed by the word impropriety. When Edmund emerged, indignation colored his composure. He approached Eliza in the corridor with civility sharpened into warning. "You mistake gratitude for advancement," he murmured. "I mistake nothing, sir," she replied evenly. "See that you do not," he returned. That night, the Duke's strength faltered unexpectedly. A tremor seized him, breath shortened, fever threatened return. The physician, summoned in haste, examined the latest vial and frowned. "This concentration is weaker than prescribed," he said quietly. Eliza felt the blood drain from her face. She had overseen each measure since assuming the task. Only that afternoon had Edmund insisted upon relieving her briefly, citing concern for appearances. The Duke's gaze found hers across the lamplight, lucid despite exhaustion. "Courage, Miss Hartwell," he whispered, voice threaded with both command and trust. "Let us see who tires first." Outside, wind battered the windows like insistent knuckles, and somewhere below, a door closed with deliberate force. The relapse came with the violence of a winter squall, swift and merciless. By midnight the Duke's skin burned with fever, his breath shallow as though drawn through ice. The physician worked with anxious restraint, restoring the proper draught and muttering darkly of contamination. Edmund was nowhere to be found. Eliza remained at the bedside, sleeves rolled beyond decorum, a cool cloth steady in her hand. Each labored breath struck her like accusation. Had she been careless? Had her vigilance faltered for a single fatal moment? The thought pressed hard against her composure, yet she did not yield to panic. She adjusted the pillows, coaxed water between clenched teeth, and counted the rhythm of his pulse as if it were a fragile metronome upon which the future depended. Near dawn his eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then fixing upon her face as though surfacing from deep water. "You persist," he murmured, voice ragged. "So do you," she replied. A faint smile ghosted across his lips before pain reclaimed it. "I fear my brother mistakes patience for virtue." "You must not speak," she urged gently. "I must," he insisted, a tremor threading his words. for silence has nearly cost me everything." The confession hung between them heavier than the storm outside. Rain battered the panes. Thunder rolled across the estate like distant artillery. Within the chamber the air seemed charged with reckoning. He drifted again, yet this time sleep softened rather than consumed him. Hours passed measured only by the dwindling candles and the steadying cadence of his breath. When the fever at last retreated, it did so reluctantly, leaving him pale but lucid. "You should rest," he said as morning light seeped through the curtains. "I will when you do," she answered. His gaze lingered upon her with new clarity, as though reassessing not her station but her essence. "Why?" he asked quietly. "Why hazard yourself for a man whose name outweighs yours 100-fold? She hesitated, aware that truth could wound as surely as deceit. "Because your name is not what lies in this bed," she said at last. "A man does." The simplicity of her answer struck him silent. Days followed in cautious recovery. Strength returned in increments. A longer walk across the chamber, a steadier grip upon the cane, an appetite reclaimed. With each improvement, Edmund's visits grew less frequent. The household sensed the shifting current. Loyalties wavered like weather vanes in uncertain wind. One afternoon, when sunlight briefly pierced the clouds and illuminated dust motes like suspended gold, the Duke requested privacy. Servants withdrew, the corridor quieted. Only Eliza remained. "There are truths," he began, fingers tracing the carved head of his cane, "which pride forbids a gentleman to utter." She stood composed, yet her pulse quickened. "I married," he continued, "to satisfy expectation, not affection. My late wife deserved more than alliance. I offered her courtesy when she required devotion." His jaw tightened. She died believing herself tolerated. Regret roughened his voice beyond concealment. Eliza felt its sincerity as keenly as if it were her own sorrow. "Regret is not redemption," she said softly, "but it may guide one toward it." His eyes lifted to hers. "And you, Miss Hartwell? Do you believe redemption possible for a man such as I?" "For any who choose courage over convenience," she answered. He studied her as though memorizing the cadence of her conviction. "Then I have misjudged the hierarchy of this house," he said. "For courage has not resided in its titled chambers." The intimacy of the moment unsettled them both. She moved to adjust the curtain, creating distance where none had been requested. "You risk scandal," he added quietly. "My brother will not tolerate your influence." "I do not seek influence," she replied, though she knew perception seldom distinguished intention. A knock shattered the fragile stillness. Edmund entered without invitation, eyes sharp with restrained fury. He took in the Duke's upright posture, the warmth of the hearth, the absence of decay he had perhaps anticipated. "It seems convalescence agrees with you," he observed coolly. "It does," the Duke replied, "particularly when supervised with diligence." Edmund's gaze flicked to Eliza. "Diligence can be misinterpreted." "By whom?" the Duke asked. "By society," Edmund answered, "which does not look kindly upon blurred boundaries." Silence followed, taut as drawn wire. "My boundaries," the Duke said at last, "are my own to define." Edmund's composure cracked then, revealing impatience beneath polish. "You would jeopardize the estate for a servant?" "I would preserve it from treachery," the Duke returned evenly. Color drained from Edmund's face. "You accuse me?" "I observe patterns," he replied. "Medicine diluted. Advice premature. Concern disproportionate to compassion." The accusation landed with deliberate weight. Edmund opened his mouth, then closed it, calculation replacing indignation. "You are not yet fully recovered," he said stiffly. "I shall attribute these suspicions to weakness." "Do not," the Duke answered, voice steady. "Weakness is no longer the governing force in this chamber." The dismissal was unmistakable. Edmund withdrew, but not before casting Eliza a glance that promised retribution. When the door shut, the Duke exhaled slowly. "I have placed you at hazard." "You have placed yourself at truth," she corrected. He regarded her with something approaching wonder. "You speak as though rank were incidental." "It is," she said. "Character endures where titles decay." A fragile laugh escaped him, half astonishment, half admiration. "Then allow me one honest admission, Miss Hartwell." She waited, breath caught between caution and curiosity. "I no longer endure your presence as necessity," he said. "I seek it." The words, though spoken without flourish, altered the air irrevocably. She felt heat rise to her cheeks, not from impropriety but from recognition. This was no longer mere loyalty, it was alignment. Before she could answer, A sharp cry echoed from below, the housekeeper's voice raised in alarm. Footsteps hurried along the corridor, urgent and uneven. A servant burst into the chamber without ceremony. "Your Grace," he stammered, "the solicitor has arrived, with documents requiring immediate signature." The Duke's gaze hardened, understanding dawning with swift clarity. He met Eliza's eyes, resolve replacing fragility. "Then let us receive him," he said quietly, "before courage is tested again." The solicitor waited in the lower drawing room with an air of solemn anticipation, a leather case resting upon his knees like a sealed verdict. Snow had begun to fall beyond the tall windows, whitening the estate with deceptive serenity. Within, tension moved unseen yet palpable, threading through servants and kin alike. Alistair descended the staircase slowly but without assistance, his cane striking each step with measured resolve. Eliza followed at a respectful distance, not as attendant but as witness. Edmund stood near the hearth, posture immaculate, expression composed to the point of rigidity. "My dear brother," Edmund began, "this exertion is unnecessary. Mr. Whitcomb can return at a more suitable hour." "There is no hour more suitable than the present," Alistair replied, reaching the final step. Though pallor still marked his features, his eyes held unmistakable clarity. "Pray be seated." They gathered around the polished mahogany table where so many presumptions had been drafted in his absence. The solicitor cleared his throat delicately. "These documents," he explained, "pertain to provisional transfer of estate authority, prepared at Mr. Edmund Ashbourne's request during your Grace's indisposition." A silence descended, brittle as ice. Alistair extended his hand. "I shall review them." Edmund's jaw tightened. "It was merely precaution." "Precaution presumes incapacity," Alistair answered evenly, scanning the parchment. "I find myself unexpectedly capable." Each clause spoke of contingency that bordered upon inevitability. Signatures awaited where weakness had been assumed. He laid the pages down with deliberate calm. "Mr. Whitcomb," he said, "you will draft new instruments." Edmund stiffened. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds," Alistair replied, gaze unwavering, "that my household has demonstrated divided loyalties." The words reverberated through the room. Eliza felt the weight of every glance though none addressed her directly. She remained silent, her composure intact, yet her presence had become the fulcrum upon which the conflict balanced. "I have discovered," Alistair continued, "that negligence nearly proved fatal. I have also discovered that diligence restored me." Edmund's composure fractured. "You cannot attribute illness to malice." "I attribute survival to courage," Alistair returned. The solicitor shifted uncomfortably, sensing currents beyond legal discourse. "Your Grace, what revisions do you require?" "A reallocation of managerial authority," Alistair said. "Effective immediately." "My brother's stewardship is concluded." Shock flared openly now. Edmund rose to his feet. "You would humiliate me before servants?" "I would prevent further humiliation of myself," Alistair replied. The dismissal was final. Edmund's gaze flicked toward Eliza with unmasked resentment before he strode from the chamber, the door closing with resonant force. Snow continued its silent descent as though to muffle scandal. When the solicitor departed with amended instructions, the household dispersed in uneasy quiet. Only Alistair and Eliza remained near the hearth, the fire casting restless light across polished floors. "You have altered the course of your family," she said softly. "I have altered the course of my conscience," he answered. She met his gaze, aware that gratitude no longer defined their exchange. Something deeper had taken root, perilous and luminous. "You must understand," he continued, stepping closer despite lingering weakness, "that what I do now is not solely for justice." Her breath stilled. "I was left to contemplate death," he said, voice low yet unwavering. "In that solitude I measured my life and found it wanting in sincerity. You entered that chamber without title or ambition, and you restored more than my strength." She felt the truth of his words tremble between them. "Your Grace," she began. "Alistair," he corrected gently. If only in this moment. The intimacy of the name unsettled her more than any accusation could have. "Alistair," she repeated, the syllables fragile yet resolute. "I will not disguise what has grown," he said. "Affection does not consult propriety before it takes root." She searched his face for hesitation and found none. "Society will consult it relentlessly," she warned. "Let society exhaust itself," he replied. "I have exhausted obedience." The declaration lingered like embers in still air. Outside, the snowfall thickened, cloaking Ashbourne in austere purity. "You risk everything," she said. "I risk living truthfully," he answered. "Which is more than I can say for my former alliances." He reached for her hand, not with possession but with request. She hesitated only a heartbeat before allowing her fingers to rest within his grasp. The contact was warm, deliberate, devoid of secrecy. "I will not consign you to whispers without choice," he continued. "If you remain here, it shall be by your will, not circumstance." Her pulse quickened. "And what would you have me choose?" "To stand beside me," he said simply. "Not as servant. As equal in courage if not in birth." The audacity of the proposal struck her silent. It was not yet a formal declaration, but its implication rang unmistakably clear. "You do not ask lightly," she said at last. "I do nothing lightly any longer." Emotion tightened her throat, yet clarity steadied her voice. "Then hear mine in equal candor. I will not be a token of rebellion nor an ornament of gratitude." "You shall be neither," he replied. "You shall be my deliberate devotion." The fire crackled, echoing the intensity neither sought to disguise. For the first time, hope felt less like defiance and more like destiny. Footsteps sounded distantly in the corridor, hesitant yet purposeful. A servant appeared at the threshold, face pale. "Your Grace," he said, bowing deeply, "a carriage has arrived from London. Lady Marbury herself requests audience." Eliza felt the air shift once more. Lady Marbury, Edmund's formidable mother-in-law, was renowned for influence sharpened by aristocratic pride. Alistair's expression did not falter. Instead, resolve settled upon him like armor newly claimed. "Then let her enter," he said quietly, releasing Eliza's hand only to straighten his posture. As the servant withdrew, Eliza understood that the battle had merely transformed, not ended. Courage had preserved life, now it must defend love. Beyond the doors, footsteps approached with deliberate authority, and the handle turned slowly as though history itself sought to intervene. Lady Marbury entered Ashbourne as though the estate had been built to accommodate her judgment. Tall, austere, and robed in sable trimmed with restrained elegance, she carried herself with the composure of one who believed lineage an irrefutable virtue. Snow clung to the hem of her cloak, melting slowly upon polished floors as servants bowed with nervous precision. Alistair did not bow. He stood at the center of the drawing room, one hand resting lightly upon his cane, the other relaxed at his side. Eliza remained near the hearth, not concealed, not displayed, but present, her posture straight, her expression unguarded. "Your Grace," Lady Marbury said, her voice measured like a magistrate's decree, "I trust reports of your recovery are accurate." "They are," he replied, "though I cannot credit familial concern for the improvement." A flicker of irritation crossed her features before discipline reclaimed it. "I come not for sentiment, but for prudence." "Then we are aligned," he answered. She removed her gloves slowly as though preparing for delicate surgery. "It has reached my ear that you have dismissed your brother from authority and elevated a servant beyond her station." Eliza felt every syllable strike, yet she did not avert her gaze. "I have corrected a misjudgment," Alistair replied evenly, "and I have recognized merit where it was demonstrated." "Merit," Lady Marbury repeated, allowing the word to sour slightly. "Your estate is not a charity for romantic indulgence." "It is not," he agreed. "It is my responsibility. And I will not permit it to be governed by those who mistook my illness for opportunity." Her eyes sharpened. "You accuse Edmund of ambition?" "I accuse him of impatience." Silence thickened between them. The fire hissed softly, consuming its fuel with steady resolve. Lady Marbury's gaze shifted to Eliza at last. "And you," she said, "do you comprehend the turbulence your presence invites?" Eliza stepped forward before Alistair could respond. "I comprehend that service rendered with integrity is not turbulence, madam." The older woman regarded her coolly. "Integrity is admirable in moderation. In scarcity," Eliza answered quietly, "it becomes necessary." A faint tightening of Lady Marbury's jaw betrayed the impact of the reply. She turned back to Alistair. "You would imperil your name for this conviction?" "My name was imperiled by neglect," he said. "It is strengthened by loyalty." "Loyalty fades when circumstances change," she countered. "Then I shall ensure circumstances reward it." The exchange sharpened, yet beneath it flowed something deeper, a reckoning between tradition and choice. Alistair felt the weight of expectation pressing upon him like ancestral hands demanding compliance. He had complied before, married for alliance, spoken for propriety, lived for appearance. The memory tasted bitter now. "I will speak plainly," Lady Marbury said at last. "Withdraw this infatuation. Restore your brother. Send the girl away with compensation. Let discretion mend what folly has threatened." Eliza's pulse quickened, yet she kept her chin lifted. Alistair's answer came without hesitation. "No." The word rang clear, unadorned and irrevocable. Lady Marbury's composure fractured, revealing the steel beneath velvet. "Then you invite scandal." "I invite truth," he replied. "Society will not receive it kindly." "Society received my suffering with indifference," he returned. "Its kindness is not indispensable." For a moment, the matriarch seemed prepared to unleash a sharper rebuke. Instead, she drew herself upright. "You mistake defiance for strength," she said. "I mistake nothing," he answered. "I was left to die by blood. I was preserved by courage. I will not now betray the latter to appease the former." The words settled like a verdict delivered. Lady Marbury studied him as though searching for weakness and finding none. Her gaze lingered upon Eliza one final time, not with contempt now but with wary calculation. "You will discover," she said softly, "that courage invites trials." "Then we shall meet them," Alistair replied. She replaced her gloves and departed without further ceremony, the door closing behind her with dignified finality. The house seemed to exhale. Yet peace did not follow. By evening, word of confrontation had spread beyond Ashbourne's gates. Letters arrived by courier, inquiries cloaked as concern. Invitations were conspicuously withdrawn. The estate, once insulated by rank, felt newly exposed. Alistair summoned the household to the grand hall before nightfall. Chandeliers blazed above them, casting prisms across polished marble. Servants lined the perimeter, stewards stood attentive, even distant relations who lingered for advantage took cautious seats. Eliza stood beside him, not behind. He allowed the murmur to subside before speaking. "You have witnessed division within these walls," he began. "You have observed illness and perhaps presumed its consequence." His gaze swept the assembly steadily. "I stand before you not as a relic spared, but as a man restored. Restoration, however, demands correction." He announced the reorganization of authority with clarity and precision. Edmund's stewardship was formally rescinded, oversight transferred to trusted hands whose loyalty had been proven through action, not assumption. Murmurs rippled but did not erupt. Then he paused. "There is further matter," he said. Eliza felt the air grow charged as though lightning hovered unseen. "During my confinement," he continued, "one among you entered my chamber without promise of reward, without expectation of advancement, and without fear of inconvenience." His voice softened yet gained resonance. "She tended not my title but my humanity." He turned toward her fully. "I will not allow that devotion to be repaid with obscurity." A hush fell absolute. "Miss Eliza Hartwell," he said, each syllable deliberate, "has consented to remain at Ashbourne, not as servant." Gasps flickered through the hall like startled birds. "As my intended wife." Silence followed, dense, electric. Eliza's heart pounded, yet she did not falter. He had not warned her of this precise moment, yet he had given her choice and she had made it. In private, she had answered him not with trembling surrender but with measured assent. "I do not seek to erase her origin," he continued. "I honor it. For character does not descend through bloodlines, it rises through conduct." The tension reached a precipice. One elderly steward stepped forward hesitantly. "Your Grace," he ventured, "the county will speak." "Let it," Alistair replied. Another voice, sharper, cut through. Edmund, who had re-entered unnoticed, stood near the back, fury barely restrained. "You disgrace our lineage," he said openly. Alistair met his brother's glare without flinching. "I redeem it. You elevate sentiment above reason. I elevate integrity above ambition." Edmund's hands curled into fists. "You will regret this folly." "Regret," Alistair answered, "has been my tutor. I have learned sufficiently." The brothers stood locked in confrontation, years of rivalry distilled into a single charged moment. Around them, servants and relations watched history tilt. At last Edmund turned away, recognizing defeat not merely of position but of influence. He strode from the hall, the echo of his departure resonating like a door closing upon inherited expectation. Gradually the murmur softened. Some faces remained skeptical, others reflective. A few, those who had witnessed Eliza's vigil, allowed faint approval to show. Alistair extended his hand to her publicly. She accepted it. The gesture required no flourish. It was simple, visible, irrevocable. In the days that followed, resistance did not vanish, but it lost momentum. Those who valued stability over scandal adjusted swiftly. Those who valued pride departed quietly. Ashbourne did not collapse, it recalibrated. Spring approached with hesitant warmth. Snow surrendered to thaw. Frost gave way to fragile buds along the estate's ancient gardens. Renewal mirrored the transformation within its walls. On the morning their betrothal was formally announced in London papers, Eliza stood at the terrace overlooking the ground she had once traversed with lowered gaze. Alistair joined her, his stride stronger now, his bearing restored. "Do you tremble?" he asked gently. "Only at the magnitude," she admitted. "Then allow me to steady it," he replied. She turned to him, searching for any trace of doubt. There was none, only conviction tempered by gratitude. "You were prepared to die alone," she said softly. "I was," he answered. "And in that solitude I understood what life required." He took her hands fully. "You did not save a duke," he said. "You saved a man who had forgotten how to live honestly." Emotion welled, but she held it with composed strength. "And you chose courage when it would have been simpler to choose comfort." He smiled faintly. "Comfort nearly killed me." Below, the estate stirred with renewed purpose. Staff moved not with apprehension but with rhythm restored. The house no longer felt like a mausoleum awaiting inheritance. It felt inhabited. As church bells in the distant village began their noon peal, Alistair drew her gently closer. "Whatever trials await," he said, "we shall face them without pretense." She nodded, certainty anchoring her. For courage proved more faithful than blood. He pressed a deliberate kiss to her brow, not impulsive, not concealed, but solemn as oath. Ashbourne stood behind them, its stone warmed by rising sun, its windows reflecting light instead of shadow. The conflict that had threatened to fracture its foundation had instead clarified its purpose. And in that luminous stillness, where dignity had triumphed over betrayal and love had risen from the ashes of neglect, the duke who had been left to die stood irrevocably restored, no longer by inheritance but by choice.